26 years ago, four Cambodian warring factions came together to sign a peace agreement to end Cambodia's civil war. But until now, experts like Peter Maguire see that Cambodian democracy is only still at an early stage because the implementation of the agreement was imperfect from the beginning. Peter Maguire talked to me at VOA studio last week.
Good afternoon.
Thank you so much for agreeing to give an interview to VOA. 26 years after the signing of the Paris Peace Agreement to end the war in Cambodia. So what is the achievement of implementing this agreement?
Well, I would say that in many ways Cambodian democracy was stillborn after the Paris Peace Agreement.
26 years?
Well, mainly because the big point of the Paris Peace Agreement was having a, quote, free and fair election. In the end, they wound up with a disputed election. Some say loser refused to accept the outcome, and they set up a very imperfect government. Moreover, the United Nations didn't deal with issues of accountability in the Paris Peace Agreement. There was no mention of the genocide. The Khmer Rouge was treated as a legitimate political party, and it was not until Prime Minister Hun Sen defeated the Khmer Rouge with force and diplomacy and actually captured war crime suspects that the UN even really engaged in discussion of accountability. So again, it was a very imperfect democracy from day one. Many people in the human rights industry had invested a great deal in its success. The Cambodian model for peacekeeping was then taken to Yugoslavia, run by Akashi, the same man who ran the Cambodian occupation, and the results were very similar and imperfect.
And you talk about the Khmer Rouge. Had the Khmer Rouge not leave the agreement, it would be a legitimate party as of now, right? Not end up in the court.
Well, the Khmer Rouge in the Paris Peace Agreement was treated as one of the parties that, you know, the concept of neutrality was sacred at that point to the United Nations. And many Cambodians found it hard to believe that the genocidal regime that had killed their families was included as a legitimate party, and no mention of their atrocities was ever made. So they, to say the least, got off to a very, very bad start. Hun Sen had practically a monopoly on military force, so the UN wasn't prepared to use force against the Khmer Rouge, much less Hun Sen, so it was confused to say the least. And then the final episode between Hun Sen and Ronnerid comes in '97 and involves again military force and fighting. We have the famous Sam Rainsy grenade attack. We have a history of intimidation of political opponents and political parties. So it's a stretch to call it democracy on some level.
Yeah, 20 years after you mentioned about 1997 coup, military coup against Prince Ronnerid. Now there's another similar situation where the main opposition party, Cambodia National Rescue Party, is now facing a dissolution when its leader Kem Sokha has been jailed on charges of treason, colluding with the U.S. So what do you think about this all situation that is happening right now in Cambodia?
It doesn't surprise me. I think that the Chinese are going to back Hun Sen with many economic strings attached, but none of the human rights strings that the West attaches. And this has been happening at an increasingly fast pace over the last decade and in the last few years, and China continues to make it very clear that they will back Hun Sen irrespective of what he does internally. And this is the Chinese position, and it's been a consistent one from that.
When the international community, especially the Western and also human rights activists, as you mentioned earlier, talk about human rights and democracy, and then Prime Minister Hun Sen bring in development. So how can these two compare?
I think the forces of development on some level are more powerful in that people see their standard of living getting better and the economy getting better, and the human rights situation has always been fairly bad for opposition members in Cambodia. This is nothing new. But now that it's affecting white NGOs, white people, American newspapers, things like that, this is new, right? Shutting down the Cambodia Daily. This is significant. Things are escalating. For Hun Sen to say that Americans may have to leave in helicopters like they did in 1975, this is a very provocative move. But it's also illustrative of his sense of security in his future with his patron China.
Some has called for tougher sanction on Cambodia, and in the that's just last week the Swedish embassy came out with a very strong statement saying that if they dissolve the opposition party, Sweden will rethink about its engagement with Cambodia, and Sweden is the fourth largest donor to Cambodia. And I have here a copy is the US FY18 budget, where Cambodia is also mentioned here, and the bill suggests 2 points, main points. One is condition on assistance to Cambodia with a certain element if Cambodia cannot fulfill that, including releasing the political prisoners. And second point is on inadmissibility of a Cambodian official, those who the U.S. see as violators of human rights and also undermining democracy from entering the U.S. So what do you think about this measure? Is it going to be effective or no?
No, again, my answer is largely the same. I mean, Hun Sen is a master of survival. And when he was at his most vulnerable was after the coup with Prince Ronald, and that's where the most effective pressure was brought to bear on him. And not only did he weather that storm, he masterfully played the international community. And do you remember what he did? Do you remember what his strategy was after the coup? War crimes trials. So he said, okay, now we're going to, look over here. And Hun Sen, again, he is a master of political survival, like him or hate him. And I don't see sufficient leverage to bring him to his knees to change what has been well-established policy now for, what, how many years? 20, how long?
Hun Sen has been in power for over 32 years.
Yeah, exactly. So he's seen it all at this point. And he's in the fourth quarter probably of his rule. And it almost looks like he's trying to clear away anything that he doesn't want for whoever succeeds him. My guess would be that it'll be an authoritarian, it'll be more or less a one-party state in many ways, which it sort of entertained the idea of an opposition, but if the opposition appeared too powerful, the opposition would be intimidated to a place of not being able to run a full campaign. And it'll have a market economy, much like China, but an authoritarian internal system. And in many ways, that's the way I've always seen it. But as I said, now that Westerners are being affected, now that the grasp of that authoritarianism is stretching out beyond Cambodians, we're hearing much more about it. But this is not new to Cambodians who are trying to protest logging or land seizures or the many injustices we've seen since the end of UNTAC.
But Cambodia is a young country with under 30 years old, and these people have in the past 20 years exposed to at least to Western ideology and freedom, and with this booming of the internet in the country.
Sure.
How can they cope with this if the country turn back to a one-party system?
I think if they are, if the economy continues to stay good and there's some level of financial prosperity across the board that raises people's standards of living, they will probably go along with it. I don't know. I mean, that's anybody's guess. You know, again, I've seen people who are very much on the West human rights side go over to the Cambodian government side and do complete 180s. People who were strong advocates of human rights and war crimes trials, and you know, now they're working for Hun Sen. And so, you know, self-interest is a strong incentive.
Thank you so much, Peter, for
anytime.
talking to VA.
Okay.
Thank you.